Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update. First about the for the 12th of August, 2024. My goodness, time flies, and my holiday is flying away. Nonetheless, I do need to purge myself of all this information and impart that to you. We're going to start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and of course, you can find them in the description to the video below. We have quite a few interesting numbers in this. First of all, personnel 1,080, less than we have seen, which is interesting given Kursk has been taking place. And I would think that these figures would include POWs as well. And there have been some vast numbers of POWs taken recently. It could indicate that Kursk is replacing some elements of elsewhere along the front line as an area for losses, and therefore things have remained the same in terms of losses generally. Although it has to also be said that the Russians are continuing to make gains in places like Touretsk and New York. New York is looking like falling. I have not kept up on the mapping, though, in terms of what's been happening along the east in particular. So I am well out of date with regard to that. So 3 tanks is not very much. 5 armored personnel vehicles, likewise 65 artillery systems. That shows that even though there might not be these engagement. Well, okay, rewind. I think the attacks into Kursk will show that the Ukrainians will lose more vehicles than the Russians in attacking. That's just what happened. So we are going to expect some fairly high Ukrainian losses. When we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list, I would expect the Ukrainian losses to have gone up and the Russian losses probably to have stayed around the same. Might even be lower to some degree. You've got 3 tanks and 5 armored personnel vehicles that I think probably indicate that the more activities taking place along the front lines of Ukrainian attacks and Russian attacks, but that the Ukrainians are trying really hard still to degrade the Russian artillery systems here. So 65 artillery systems being taken out is a significant number, over 3 times the daily average, and I think that's what we're going to expect to see going forward. They're never going to take the foot off with regard to artillery, whether they're on defense or offense. The Ukrainians are going to be degrading Russian artillery and air defense systems. In fact, you see 1 anti-aircraft warfare system taken out, 3 multiple launch rocket systems as well. That's quite useful. 66 vehicles and fuel tanks, a fairly high number there, quite typical though at the moment, and 1 piece of special equipment. No aircraft or helicopters taken out today. We have heard lots of rumors about what's happened in the Kursk Oblast. Then when we look at Andrew's list, what do we see here? We see exactly that. So there is, like, if you ignore everything from the purple down at the bottom, there's is either unknown or misses, then you have pretty much a parity in terms of combat losses. Russians have probably lost a tad more given the artillery systems that have been thrown on there. Now, in reality, the Russians, if these general staff figures are going to be somewhat accurate at least, then there'll be huge numbers of artillery to be added onto that. And I think that is the case of a daily basis. And also, you will get an asymmetry between the Russian and the Ukrainian losses there, because I think the Russians lose an awful lot more artillery than the Ukrainians, but you just don't see that visually confirmed from video evidence and so on and so forth. So let's look and see what the Ukrainians have lost and see if there's anything of high value there. It's obviously all of high value to the Ukrainians. Electronic warfare system, a NOTO system, another Plaston RP3000 surveillance and comms, maybe 2 even, and some other comms equipment, an excavator. Now we go on to artillery and a destroyed Susanna 2. Unknown cause, that's going to be a bit of a sore loss. That's a decent bit of kit there. We have that's a self-propelled howitzer provided by the Slovakians, or built by the Slovakians. Then we have, going on to a tank, T-64 destroyed. Infantry fighting vehicle, a Marder there that was damaged, but then recovered by Brem 1. So that's good news. Infantry fighting vehicle, BTR. Then we go on to APCs. We've got a whole mix there, BTR 70s, Humvee, Senator, M113. So right list and just over 50% destroyed or abandoned. And then with MRAPs, 2 out of 6, so a third of them destroyed, the rest damaged. And we have Max Pros, Kozak 2s there, in that list, and then we get on to civilian vehicles, most of them destroyed. So yeah, it is not a crazy loss list there, as in, all of these combat assets are valuable to the Ukrainians, but it's not the end of the world. You're going to expect to see that, and not actually too many tanks there, just one tank on that list. Then we go to the Russian list, and we see electronic warfare equipment, some comms equipment, surveillance and comms, that is, artillery systems. We have one captured D30. So I presume that that's the Russians capturing a D30 off the Ukrainians. Some random. Well, no, sorry, no, it's not at all. It's the Ukraine is capturing a D30 off the Russians, which is useful because that is not that is better than the zero sum. Well, it is exactly a zero sum game. Actually, it's it's the Russians lose that and the Ukrainians gain it. Sorry, I'm just getting my brain in a muddle. Yeah, various other artillery there, and then we have a captured T80 BVM mod 2022 there. And a T90M damage, which would be good for the Ukrainians. Infantry fighting vehicles, 3/4 of the 4 are destroyed or abandoned. And then for the APCs, a vast majority, looks like 90% abandoned or destroyed. A lot of them abandoned here, and then being hit by FPV drones. So we've got BTR 82s, BTR 80s, MTLBs, Tiger M's. The BTR 82A is an infantry fighting vehicle. Sorry, yeah, the Russians losing quite a lot of kit, nothing crazy high value, trucks and civilian vehicles and whatnot to add onto that as well. So both sides, I think, losing about the same. The Russians would be slightly worse off, I think, from this list, given the combat losses and the percentage that are damaged, the ratio that are damaged and destroyed against what the Ukrainians have. I think that puts the Ukrainians in a slightly better position. But this is fairly typical of a side of Ukraine that is starting to attack a little bit more, certainly in one area. Now, there are just huge numbers of, I won't show you in too much detail, huge numbers of Russian POWs being taken. As Thomas Tyner says, excellent. These are teen conscripts and not volunteers. Now, finally, lots of Russian families will suddenly suddenly become very, very anti-war. Capturing lots and lots of such teen conscripts and parading them around is an ideal way to drive a wedge between Russians and Putin. It's a really interesting observation. We'll come on to this. Actually, we might not, because I think I'm going to separate my Kursk stuff out. But there's a thing in the Kursk information I was going to share with you that talks about how the Russians are looting a lot in the Kursk area now that the Ukrainians have invaded, they've lost power, etc., etc. And as Klanetsvergen here says, a reminder that Russian society is mainly held together by repression and not by sense of citizens' responsibility. And I wonder whether that kind of thing might feed into how the Russians are going to deal with all these POWs and the idea that they're not doing very well in Kursk. The idea is that something like, you hear it different ways, maybe 25% is completely for the war, 25% are completely anti the war, but many of them have left the country or keep rather quiet these days, it's too dangerous, and the middle 50% are meh, sort of either way. It's, not really wholly bothered. They're not as fervent either way. Now, when you hear about the POW losses, in the same way that you hear about the point here is that the POWs, if they are young teenage conscripts, will have more of an effect than body bags of people who have volunteered for the war. And that might be the case. You really might get an activation of that middle 50% of the population who are able to be swayed one way or the other. You might get them starting to get a bit angsty about the war as a whole. I wonder what the public is feeling right now in Russia, truly, under the radar with regard to the war. Yeah, especially given Kursk. Now, Ukraine's HIMARS attack on the Russian convoy in Rilsk, the one that I sort of showed you this video imagery, but I didn't really go into too much detail because, YouTube. Chris Owicki's done a little thread on it. Ukraine's HIMARS attack on the Russian convoy in Kursk region has prompted fury from Russian mill bloggers at the military's incompetence. Quote, the Russian land is full of idiots, one concludes. Another complains that, quote, this is some kind of sodomy. At least 13 trucks filled with Russian troops were hit by Ukrainian HIMARS missiles on 8th of August, killing many soldiers. There were some claims of 100, other claims of 490 or something like that. So somewhere in between those two is probably the truth. It's likely to be one of the Russia's biggest losses of life in a single incident since the full-scale war began in February 2022. Although there is that time where the Ukrainians struck that massive, they're not having a New Year's celebration or something. It was a school that was being used entirely as a Russian kind of billeting. Where was it? Goodness me, time has flown. But about, I think, probably a year and a half ago, it was absolutely taken out, and there was it up to 600 people died or were casualties there, and it was hugely controversial. And then the Russians hit a place in Druzhkivka, just on that kind of Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka um, semicircle, and then claimed to have taken out exactly the same number of Russians and Ukrainians, sorry, and it was complete nonsense. And we did some debunking of that claim, but that was in answer to that huge loss of life that the Russians took. But other than that, this could be, one of the biggest ones. So it's certainly one of the biggest. The Russian military analyst and volunteer Roman Alekine calls for the negligent commander in charge of the convoy to be executed, or maybe less drastically, to be demoted and sent to join the Meat Wave assault unit. Quote, who gave the order to remove it in columns in drone's observation zone and consequently to be defeated by HIMARS? It's not only an asshole, but must be sentenced according to the laws of wartime. Today, he deserves to be sent to an assault squad. And I don't care what their rank is, demote them to private and send them to an assault squad. Those who command the movement in the column themselves, being in the column itself, are no less an asshole. But often you can't send him to a storm unit because there is no one to send, although assholes often survive, and then they get posts and medals for having survived. Oleg Tsarov bemoans the lack of learning evident in the decision to send the troops in a highly clustered convoy. Quote, this is just trash. The third year of war and the troops are still being organized in columns. Older than Edda, another source here, recommends punishing the column's commander by beating him like a dog until he is crapping himself, and suggests a similar punishment to that advocated by Sarov. He comments on how it feels unpleasantly vulnerable when you pass by a stalled convoy. One of the most quote, one of the most unpleasant feelings in war is driving slowly past the military column standing on the side of the road. You're driving and a bunch of effers are standing next to the car, scratching their balls, talking and smoking. The only desire at that moment is to press the gas pedal all the way down and drive away from the effers. For columns, especially those standing on the side of the road in the zone of destruction by enemy missile and artillery weapons, you need to beat them up, etc., etc. And just lots of people, these Russian mill bloggers, just absolutely excoriating the Russian commanders here, and the idea that you can just line up in columns and get absolutely hammered. So you can go and read that on Chris Owiki's thread there. Just lots of people super unhappy about that, and I think that's a good thing to see Russians have a go at their own there. Now, War Vehicle Tracker refers here to a BTR-4E infantry fighting vehicle with a mounted cope cage that has been apparently captured by the Russians in the Ukrainian region here. Now, the location of this appears to be in a village called Giri, which initially, when this was seen, it was thought to be a Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle, what it is. But it was thought then that the Ukrainians had got that far and taken that village. But the reality appears to be that was a captured vehicle. And that has then caused people to change their mapping of how far Ukraine has got. But then someone else, PS01 here, saying a Russian channel suggests that the captured Ukrainian BTR-4 by the Akhmat. So the idea is caught by the Akhmat, and they've actually had some success in doing an ambush to the Akhmat and capturing one or two vehicles, which some people have been going, oh, that's something of a surprise. A Russian channel suggests that the captured BTR-4 by Akhmat was in reality found abandoned in the forest. It publishes photos of the abandoned BTR. So something might be somewhat wrong with it, or who knows. But anyway, the Ukrainians have lost a BTR there that the Russians are using, and it wasn't so much captured in action, but found in a forest. But it has caused a change to mapping. Now, talking about Ukrainian equipment being used in Kursk, a US provided Striker. It was hit by a Russian RPG in the Kursk region. The driver suffered a concussion, but everyone survived thanks to a thick layer of armor. Ukrainian troops were using parts to patch up others, and the rest of it will be sent back to Germany for repairs. So that talks again to the survivability of these Western provided pieces of kit for the Ukrainians. Now here we have a loss here. As Trent Telenko says, more please, because he's always big on logistics being super important. A loss of a locomotive. In Russia, partisans blew up a locomotive with explosives from inside the cabin at Babaevo station in Vologda region north of Moscow. The doors were unlocked. And then we have a warehouse on the other. This is the other side of the coin here. A warehouse with grain has caught fire in Odessa. This is causing a huge amount of. There's a massive fire, and grain can go up. There's a lot of grain dust there. It's very flammable. That is going to be a huge issue. Now, that was not from a strike. There's apparently a short circuit. There was a flash of a short circuit. I don't know if it is caught on camera, but I think it's accepted that was not a strike. But my goodness, that's not what you're going to want to happen to a massive grain storage facility. That's for sure. Anyway, moving on to distant strikes. Again, another night of not too much detail at all coming from either side, actually. Russia claims it hit. There are some claims, but no details about them. So the two major ones are referred to airfields. So the Russians claim to have hit Martinivska airfield in Mykolaiv region overnight. There were ballistic missile warnings, but no reports of explosions. Invaders claim a warehouse with long-range missiles was destroyed at the airfield near Voznesensk there. On the other hand, drones attacked Shilyokovo near Moscow at night. Drones were reportedly shot down in the area of the Russian Air Force's Chkalovsky airfield. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, overnight air defense forces destroyed 18 drones over Kursk, Belgorod, and Voronezh regions. So there were drone attacks into Russia. 18 were claimed to have been shot down. The Moscow region was not mentioned in the report, and that itself is interesting. So why would they not mention an airfield that's clearly caught on camera being targeted by Ukrainian drones? That is northeast of Moscow. And there are some people saying, how have they got that far to northeast of Moscow and not been taken down by air defense? Now, whether they were all taken down by air defenses at the airport is a bit of an unknown, but to have got that far is significant, certainly for the Ukrainians there. Report suggests, says Tim White, the shooting in Moscow region went on for hours with drones seen overhead. The Chkalovsky airbase, which is northeast of the Kremlin, was targeted. It will be very troubling for Putin as to how drones can bypass all air defense before getting to the airbase and then being supposedly shot down. He goes on to say it's not the first time Ukraine has attacked Chkalovsky. This post is from 11 months ago, so there was that big smoke and explosions there 11 months ago. Incidentally, some are using this image this morning saying it's from today's attack, which obviously is fake news. And then, if you just put in Chkalovsky into, say, Twitter, you'll just see lots of the same kind of claims, but no information about what has actually taken place. What damage may or may not have been done. Just lots of claims as to explosions around there and air defense active. So that's about it for strikes overnight. Just not a lot of information, although stuff might well have happened. And then we have onto other bits and pieces. I could go on and talk in depth about Kursk, but I'll do that separately. I think a blaze has broken out the Russian-occupied Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Lots of talk about this yesterday in Ukraine this evening. So that is run by the Russians, or they are on that site. It's sending up a large column, of black smoke. Ukrainian sources report that the Russians set tires on fire in the vicinity of one of the cooling towers. So there are claims by those in the know that there's no way that can be smoking like that due to what's actually there. So they have to have taken stuff in order to have achieved that. According to unofficial information from the sources received from sources from the opposite bank, the Russians set fire to a large number of automobile tires in the cooling towers. Perhaps this is provocation or an attempt to create panic in the settlement on the right bank of the former reservoir. Currently, the ZMPP, so Zaporizhia Nuclear Power Plant, is operating as normal as possible under the conditions of occupation. Please calm down. Zelensky said Russian occupiers have started a fire in the territory of Zaporizhia Nuclear Power Plant. Currently, radiation levels are within norms. So, yeah, that is something that you might see a number of people talking about. For example, here's another source mention. Oh no, that's the same source. Sorry, though. Oh no, I meant to have two different sources. I've got the same source. Who knew? Okay, moving on to flash news. Now, I don't know whether this is a second attack onto Kinburn Spit. So, Kinburn Spit is that where you got the peninsula and the spit. The spit's a very end part. So, this might actually be. No, it looks like the spit actually. Yeah, you can see it's very thin across there. So, this is as the Dnipro River comes down past Kherson and joins with the Bug River estuary coming down from Mykolaiv. It's the Kinburn Peninsula sort of curls up northwards towards Ochakiv on the opposite side of that large estuary before it joins the Black Sea. And the Russians have artillery here that bombards Ochakiv quite often. They have other bits of military infrastructure, no doubt. Now, the Ukrainians attacked this 2 nights ago, and some of it was caught on camera. It's supposed to be a successful attack that took out 6 vehicles and whatnot. And then the videos come out this morning, and I don't know whether there's talk about attacks on Kinburn Spit that I've seen this morning, but they might be referring to 2 days ago, or the Ukrainians have attacked again. It would be great news if they've attacked again, because you're then starting to see regular strikes onto Kinburn Spit that would seem to be shaping it up for possibly an invasion by the Ukrainians rather than just raids. Flag of the Ukrainians was installed on Kinburn Spit. Videos published by Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Combating Disinformation. We'll have to watch out for that area, I think. Now, Russia is recycling, talking about disinformation, they are recycling old videos in an attempt to show success against Ukraine's incursion. Media reports, so this is going back up to Kursk. But just in general, it's not the first time this has happened. With the Kursk incursion, they've been claiming that they've repelled Ukrainian attacks, the Russians, but they do so with the use of footage that is from elsewhere. So I've seen some footage from Russian aircraft that's supposed to be them taking out Ukrainian positions and whatnot in Kursk, and then good old OSINT people have geolocated that to have been in the Donetsk front, so on and so forth. And they are basically trying to pull the wool over, I don't know, more likely their own population's eyes in terms of how things are going in Kursk in particular. Videos were in fact filmed in other areas of front or published 3 weeks before the Kursk invasion. The Business Insider, or the Insider reports, which is a Russian media outlet. And then there could well be an attack. Well, there has been an attack. There's been activity around the Belgorod border region at Kolotilovka area. Here it says the enemy breaks through Kolotilovka area, working enemy tanks, also small Ukrainian assault groups trying to attack in several points. In Prokhovka, enemy reserves were identified, which he brought up to support the attacking group. So the Ukrainians might be trying on a number of different areas, although these also could be deep reconnaissance groups that sort of do a bit of intel gathering and then come back in to where they started, rather than being a proper kind of invasion force, if you like. So we'll have to keep an eye on Belgorod as well as Kursk as the days go by. And Dmitry from War Translated says, reading the few Ukrainian channels about the situation within the border crossing, and I think he means the Belgorod border crossing here, but he could just mean Kursk in general. I see no doubt or major concern about the success in achieving the goals of the special operation. All the guys are positive. I think it's probably Kursk in general, actually. Some say that everything happening now is just a bonus. According to them, Russian channels lie about their success in defense all the time. But of course, we'll see how that goes. I'm simply trying to convey the vibe. And we'll go on and talk about that in far more detail in the Kursk video, which will only be very short. Ukrainian Su-27s have been seen in Kursk's airspace. Russia has lost air superiority in Russia, according to Aki Hakkinen. No, it's Heikkinen. Yeah, you get the idea. Um, so yeah, that would be incredibly embarrassing, I think, for the Russians that they are unable to operate successfully their own aircraft in their own country. And that the Ukrainians, under all the pressure they are and have been, are able to operate Su-27s in Kursk. Anyway, that's enough from me for this video. I'll do a short Kursk update. I appreciate your support. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.